There are still millions of girls out of school, out of primary school, and especially not getting any secondary education. And perhaps the worst statistic of all is what happens to women in conflict. This is a gross underestimate, but it's thought that over 200,000 women have been raped in the Congo in the fighting there since 1998. 200,000, and that is gross underreporting. Now, all those women are not just victims. They're actually immensely resourceful people, really resilient in coping with the circumstances they're in. They're actually, in my experience, remarkably joyful. Apart from the most dire circumstances in conflict, at a moment's notice, they will burst into song or dance for you. So they're very energised and want to do things. So what's the problem? The problem is power. Women, and poor women especially, are powerless. Those women don't have a say, often at the household level, at the community level. If they're in a cooperative or producer organisation, they don't have a say often there, and they don't have a say nationally. So what can we do about all that? Well, some of the things are very systemic, but they are straightforward to think about. Education is absolutely vital. You can't live today without being numerate and literate. In addition to that, if women have some income of their own, then they feel more powerful. But the best thing of all, in what I've seen, to help women be powerful, is to get them to organise together. One woman on her own is powerless. You should see what women do when they really get their act together jointly. Now, this example is from Lima in Peru. Now, those hillsides, as you can see, they look pretty barren. There are shanty towns built all over these hillsides. They're incredibly precarious because when the rains come, you can imagine all that lot getting washed away, and there are landslides too. Now, the women there on the outsides of the city, what they do to get some money in is they go into the city daily and they do petty trading on the streets, just in the informal economy. But the big worry was they were leaving behind children and old people, up in this area, and they weren't, they weren't being looked after, they weren't being fed. So we in Oxfam worked with them to set up community kitchens, so that some of the women could go into town and do their trading, others would look after, and particularly make sure there were meals. So here's one of the community kitchens with one of the women in it. Now, the women organised themselves, and once the women started getting organised, they started getting much more powerful. And the local mayor was charged with being corrupt. He was taking the money that should be going into the services, on those hillsides. So what those women did is they organised themselves and went down and they camped outside the town hall until he resigned. Now that's pretty strong stuff, really. And I have to say, those women that I met at the time I met them are some of the most formidable women I have ever met in the world. That's what you can do, but those are sort of quite big projects, quite long-term things to do. So what might be some quick and easy things to do to help women? And I started thinking of small things, and one of the things that first came into mind, in fact, was sanitary cloths. Can you imagine if you're a woman and you've just lost everything, you're a displaced person, you're going into a camp, you're a refugee, and you have virtually nothing with you, and you think about your period coming and you think how humiliating that's going to be. Sanitary cloths are really very important. Tampons are nowhere near this. I mean, tampons are too expensive and you can't dispose of them easily anyway. But giving women sanitary cloths is absolutely fantastic. It gives them a sense of being able to look after their bodies again. Now, the time I saw the very best piece of work I've ever seen on looking after women's needs in that way was in Pakistan after the earthquake. And in a space about a bit bigger than the size I'm standing on now, what we had built was a series of latrines and bathing cubicles, but also there was a water tank and washing lines, so the women could wash their sanitary cloths and underwear privately. And we'd done that because, in fact, we had a woman water engineer who'd sat down and talked with all the women and said, well, what is it that will really work for you? Where should we put the latrines? What do you need? And those women were so overjoyed that they had a private place to go that was really, their enclosure. So, and I might mention an even worse situation, which is almost unbelievable, but true. In South Sudan, women during their first days of their periods have to just sit over a small hole so that they drip into it for those days while other women look after their children. Now, I really cannot imagine anything that makes you feel more powerless than that. So these things really do matter. But I moved on and thinking, well, that's one sort of, small thing that would really make a difference. But what would systemically really, bring about some real change? And of course, nowadays, one of the key things that is very important is information. And we are in an information age in which it is possible for all sorts of people to get information. In particular, you can get information to women through mobile phones. So my call today is actually that we make sure that every poor woman around the world gets a mobile phone with you can have a solar battery or a chargeable by hand battery, but that they've all got that to start along the way with. My next example is from Cambodia, and this is about what mobile phones can do. This is one of the villages that we worked in Cambodia. We were working on a programme to try to get women registered for voting and then to go and vote, but also to have local women stand as district councillors. And what we did was that we gave them all mobile phones. And I think probably that lady in pink is probably one of those that we gave a phone to. Why did we give them phones? We gave them phones so that they could get in touch with each other in the different villages, they could learn what was happening in the different places, they could learn what was happening politically, nationally, as they stood for election. Now that was enormously successful, but there was one key trick in this. They all were given mobile phones, but those phones were rather special. They were pink. Why were they pink? Because the men wouldn't then steal them. So that was a little thing that you learn when you're really working locally. But what other things can mobile phones do? Well, in the money sector, they are enormously helpful. We had programs with M-Pesa in Kenya where we were able to give women through mobile phones small amounts of money to get started on a little business of their own. You can get remittances sent through on mobile phones. And also, when we were working in the Horn of Africa and in Kenya itself, during the food crisis in about 2010 and onwards, we could give cash transfers out by these newer means. And this is Turkana, which is in northern Kenya. Basically what we were doing was, instead of giving out food, which is not a good idea unless there is really none in the area, because if you're not very careful, what happens is that the farmers stop growing the food, whereas actually what you want them to do is to keep growing so that, and give people some money so they can buy it at the prices that they can now afford. So we were giving out cash. We always give it to women to make sure that it actually gets there to the family, because that's assured in that way. So I went to look at this programme. You go to a regional centre, and it's a sort of small village, small African village. You then drive for about 4 hours in your nice Oxfam van there, and you get to a village and you see there's a very small mud hut, a tuckle, and a long line of women standing outside it. And go inside, and who do you find in there but the man from Equity Bank. Equity Bank is a bank that was set up in Kenya that's won some big global awards. And this man was going out once a month to make the cash transfers to those women who had been assessed as the ones that needed it. But the really fantastic scene that I witnessed was basically a woman was pushed in a wheelbarrow through the door of this tuckle. And she was in a wheelbarrow, an elderly lady, because she couldn't walk herself. But what she did, she took out of her pocket her smart card, and she put it into Mr. Equity Bank's machine, and she put her thumbprint on it, and it went clunk, 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 and it printed out how much money she was supposed to have, and he gave it to her. Now, you can't even do that in the UK. So I came out of that saying, I've seen the future, and it's in Turkana. And it is. Those things are going on. Much innovation is taking place. Now, the other things that you can do with mobile phones are about getting information that's really vital to poor people. For instance, you can get information on weather. That's terribly important to know when you can plant your crops so that the seeds don't get washed away and so on. You can find out the prices in different markets of your products so you can decide where you're going to take your produce. You can actually call your marketing cooperative to come and collect your milk at a certain time and certain place. So there's all those things that are going on, different things that you can do with your mobile phone. But I want to come back to organising again. This last set of pictures is from Liberia. It's Liberia just after the end of the war, when we were working there, trying to get people back into their own communities and working in the capital, Monrovia. This is about hygiene here. There's a poster that says, you will not eat dirt or poo-poo. This is the start of hygiene education, that was going on. What was happening was in Monrovia, in the capital, in West Point, which was a very poor area, there was an outbreak of cholera. So what we were doing was working with women to organise again, to make sure they were looking after the water locations, but also trying to make sure that people were using latrines and so on. And the women were absolutely brilliant at all this public health messaging and so on. This is again the training that we were giving to women in Liberia so that they knew what to do. Now, they managed to control that cholera outbreak. And at the end of it, they said, well, it's all right, well, you're not going to leave us now, are you? You know, now we're all organised, we want to do something. We want to do some economic development. And so we worked with them and actually set up with them a tailoring cooperative. And here's just a picture of one of the markets in Monrovia. Now, they weren't, in the end, or aren't now, just selling goods in that sort of market. This tailoring cooperative does virtually all the school uniforms now in Monrovia. Absolutely amazing success, these women. When I visited them in 2008, I said to them, okay, you've done all this, what are you going to do now? You know, where do you go from here? You know, you're all organised, you know what you can do. And they said to me, well, we're really taking control of some of the issues about what's going on in the community. We know there's a lot of sexual abuse in the community, there's a lot of violence against women, and we're really not having it. And we've organised ourselves now that we're really going to stop this. And what happens is we have mobile phones so that when a woman is feeling very threatened or attacked, actually a whole load of other women come in and really work to stop this happening. So yet again, you find that by communicating between people and forming that sort of organisation, you can really make tremendous difference. So my overall message is we shouldn't let men have all the power. We shouldn't let men have all the power of the information age. And if we got mobile phones out to all the poor women of the world, my goodness, they would show us what we could do for them. Thank you.